So now that hopefully we have at least a fairly good sense of Ramsey correlates, I want to draw out a couple of things that having a formalism can do for you. One thing is that can help you to be more explicit and rigorous about how you think about things. And this turns out to actually be important to helping us better understand and differentiate the two kinds of functionalism and a widely made claim that functionalism in its Ramsified version is radically ontologically neutral. So consider again those two camps of functionalists. Let's start with the functional state identifiers. These are the advocates of functional state identity theory. They characterize pain as a functionally specified kind with instances that likely cut across particular physical kinds. Thus, functional state identifiers hold that any mapping of functional states to the physical states of a system that preserves the laws of the theory specifies an instance of pains. And so now we can see that my original definition of pain was really one that was consistent with functional state identifiers. On the other hand, functional specifiers, that is, advocates of functional specification theory, they view pain as the thing picked out by the definite description associated with a functional role specified by a particular theory when applied to some specific kind. As a result, then, we have to change our Ramsey sentence to accommodate functional specification theory. So we can talk about functional specifiers as follows. Functional specifiers further limit the set of permissible beta variants. Again, one defines pain as follows. Define the operator phi I HP of x1 over f to mean the property of being a member of the substitution class for x1 in the formula f, which makes f true for all beta variants I sub beta for x1 and x2, such that I sub beta is a proper subset of the intersection between our object language and our human physiology typology. So I sub O specifies our observation language, the standard interpretation for observation terms like pinpricks, while I sub HP specifies the theoretic terms of human physiology within that larger category of I sub O. We can then define pain in the spirit of the functional specifier by saying pain equals, by definition, the phi sub IHP of x sub 1 such that there's at least one x1 and at least one x2, and x1 is caused by pinpricks, and x1 causes the emission of loud noises, and x1 causes x2, and x2 causes brow wrinkling. So in other words, the functional specifier wants to further delimit the set of possible interpretations, the set of possible mappings that we can make from those variables in our theory to things in our object language. Now, we can express the ideas in this formalism in our stilted English by saying that pain is part of a unique set of states that, when mapped onto the variables of the theory, satisfy all the laws in our theory. All the laws are true, that is. And pain is the state that occupies that role in this mapping. Or alternatively, we could say something like pains are the biologically relevant human state kinds that occupy the role in the human model of the theory. So one question that might be running through your mind is, yeah, but did I really need to learn all that formalism just to be able to make that rigorous distinction between functional state identity theory and functional specification theory? And I think my answer to that question is, well, no. However, because the thinkers who wrote these papers couched their papers in this formalism in order to be facile in understanding their theories and their thinking, you have to be facile in the formalism. I also think that understanding what they're actually claiming through this vehicle of this explicit, rigorous formalism helps to debunk certain misstatements and urban myths about functionalism. So let's consider what I think is a pernicious and pervasive urban legend about functionalism in the philosophical literature. It's expressed on page 181 by Bloch as follows. Functional state identity theorists have often pointed out there might be a creature in which pain is a functionally specified soul state. So functionalism opens up the possibility that even if our pains are physical, other pains might not be. Now, I think this is just a misstatement. At least it's a misstatement if we really take these Ramsey sentences seriously. Ramsey sentences don't render theoretical predicates completely ontologically neutral. Such predicates inherit the ontological presuppositions of the object language that's used in their interpretations, and any other suppositions introduced by the theory's relations. As a result, souls are not really candidates for pains, unless, for instance, they have positions in space and time, extension, and the dualist solves the problem of mind-body interaction since they're causing physical things to happen and they're being caused by physical things. So ultimately, what this seemingly radical statement about the nature of pain by the functional state identity theorists amounts to is something like this. Look, if dualists can solve the problem of mind-body interaction, then soul states are a potential way of instantiating pain. That's just not interesting, and it's not correct to think that functionalism is this radically ontologically neutral theory. It has a great deal of flexibility within some ontological constraints and presuppositions. And I'll make one last point in this module, namely that if we think that pain gets its multiple realizability through its meaning, and its meaning is exhausted by the relationships that are depicted within the Ramsey sentence for that pain. That is, it's caused by pinpricks and it causes loud noises and so on. If we think that exhausts the meaning of pain, then we don't actually get multiple realizability. We don't actually get type identity, either one, from the Ramsey sentence itself. Where did those things come from? Those are extra additional add-ins. Those are part of our interpretation functions. Those are the constraints that we place on how to understand the variables when we interpret them on our observation language. So the actual multiple realizability, the actual ontological neutrality that functionalism supposedly brings to the table, at least functional state identity theory, that doesn't come from the Ramsey sentence itself. It comes from the relationship between that Ramsey sentence and the observation language. That's where all the action is. And functionalists who don't offer arguments for why you should have a particular interpretation function as opposed to other functions, I think they were just dead wrong about the nature of multiple realizability and where multiple realizability comes from. In fact, I would say the only plausible candidates for people who maybe understood this are Fodor and Lewis. Now, I know that sounds crazy. These are all incredibly smart people at prestigious universities publishing in top echelon journals. Nevertheless, I really do think that when we look at the formalism carefully, specify what it says rigorously and exactly, we realize that they were consistently misstating the nature of their own theory. We'll pick this up in the next lecture module. We'll talk about whether or not physicalism is true or false, and then we'll end this lecture by running through some of the basic objections that have been raised in the literature to functionalism.